Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video. In today's episode we are going to be taking a look at another fun army list that you can build with your 9th edition Guard Codex. Whether you're a Great War fanatic wanting to recreate the Battle of the Somme in space or just a die-hard Krieg fanboy, this is the video for you. You see, we are going to be exploring an army list that is a classic one for the Guard. Lots of tanks, artillery, and of course, a dash of cavalry. So without further ado, let's fix bayonets, go over the top, and dive right into today's episode. So the first thing I want to mention, as is the case with many of these fun lists, is they're not designed to be overly competitive. It's more about embracing a theme and challenging ourselves to come up with a cool army that will feel really fun and unique to use on the tabletop. Also, the units that I have picked are the ones that I like or that I personally think embody the feel and theme of the list we're trying to create. But if you've got any suggestions for units or any ideas on how we can improve the list, either competitively or really getting into that vibe, let me know down in that comment section below. I'm genuinely curious to see how my fellow Guard commanders would create their own versions of this World War I army list. But with all that said, now let's take a closer look at this army composition. Of course, we have an Arcs of Omen detachment today, but we're not including any allied scions or Votan in this army. We're just sticking with the one main detachment. For the regimental doctrines, I went with two different combinations, depending on whether I wanted to embrace the Krieg vibe a bit more or focus on a more generic World War I style. When going for the Krieg, I went for expert bombardiers because they're well known for their siege regiments, and I also went for the Cult of Sacrifice, which is the regimental doctrine that is pretty much built around the Krieg. For the slightly less regiment-specific World War I idea, I went for expert bombardiers because, again, World War I was very much about the artillery. Excessive amounts of it was used. For example, at the Battle of the Somme in 1916, there was an artillery bombardment that lasted for a full week. For the second doctrine, I went for Grim Demeanor, as I figured this would represent the mindset of the soldiers that were forced to endure the horrendous trench warfare. On top of the regiment traits, I spent 3 command points pre-game. Firstly, I took an extra senior officer, so I spent 1 CP for heroic support. Secondly, I took a relic and I went for the Clarion Proclamatus because I figured there's nothing more World War I than a giant field telephone. And finally, I gave one of my senior officers the Grand Strategist Warlord trait. I purposely stayed away from those warlord traits that were more about enhancing the individual officer's power and instead went for one that encompassed the large-scale industrial warfare of the First World War. But speaking of officers, now let's dive into our HQ choices. First up, I went for 2 Death Corps Marshals. Not only are these guys Krieg characters and therefore perfect for a World War I list, but they also bring a couple of orders each, and considering we're going to have a lot of infantry and artillery in this list, we need quite a few officers to make sure everything runs smoothly. And on top of that, they're also handing out some sweet reroll 1 auras, which is great for supporting our frontline troops and making sure our shots hit their mark. In addition, we've also got 2 command squads. Now it's up to you whether you want to go for Cadian command squads or platoon command squads. With the loadout that we've given them, with a flag, a medic, a vox, and a special weapon gunner of your choice, it really doesn't matter which one you go for, it's entirely your personal preference. Not only does this provide us with a couple more orders, giving us 6 in total, which is plenty when you take into account the fact that orders splash around, but also it gives us a little bit more flexibility. Despite the fact that our Death Corps Marshals are going to be on the front lines, rallying the troops, leading them into the fray, there are going to be those times when a squad gets strung out on a flank and they find it difficult to receive an order from that Death Corps Marshal. Thanks to the Vox casters we've got in every squad and in our command squads, and thanks to the Clarion Proclamatus giving one of our command squads an infinite range on its order, that doesn't matter where a squad is placed, it's always going to be able to get some support from its officers. I've also taken 2 Master of Ordnance. With the amount of artillery that we're bringing to the fight, we want to make sure that it's going to be getting those reroll 1s. Most of our infantry is rocking short-range firepower, and we need to ensure that the enemy has been softened up by our artillery in order for us to be able to win the fight. If we don't take the Massive Ordnance, we're going to find our Field Ordnance batteries struggling to connect their hits. I really like this combination of characters. It represents the rich tapestry of officer that could be found in the First World War. You had those that would lead from the front, charging across no man's land with their men, inspiring them and motivating them to push themselves harder. But you also have the officers that need to sit back, observe the bigger plan, and try and pull the strings. If you wanted to make this a bit more grimdark, you could drop the Death Corps Marshals and the Massive Ordnance and take a 3rd command squad. This would represent the problems at the beginning of the First World War, where officers were too far from the front lines and they found it difficult to coordinate their men and really get a grasp of the battlefield situation. And by removing the Massive Ordnance, you'll also represent that a lot of early war artillery was either very inaccurate or many of the shells were dud, meaning that a lot of hits actually ended up missing. After the HQs, we have the troops. I've gone for 9 squads of Krieg infantry, each equipped with a melter, a flamer, a vox, and a medic. I've also taken 3 full squads of combat engineers, all 10-man strong with their combat shotguns. I feel like this mixture of infantry really represents the late war tactics that were being employed by both sides, where you had the stormtroopers breaking through with infiltration tactics and the infantry following up and mopping up the strong points. In tabletop terms, this gives you a really flexible core of infantry. 120 bodies is a decent sized infantry wave, and with melters in every squad, you've got a little bit of extra anti-tank punch in case your artillery doesn't quite pull its weight. I think if you wanted to make this a little bit more competitive, you could drop the flamers and instead go for grenade launchers, further increasing your anti-tank firepower. But on the other hand, if you wanted to make it a little bit more quote-unquote realistic, I don't remember there being any melter guns at Verdun, and so you could probably get away with dropping the melters and instead going for some snipers and grenade launchers. However, the Krieg squads do represent a more elite trooper, a battle-hardened soldier who's used to the trench warfare. If you wanted to go for a early war vibe and have a lot more conscripts and feel like you're fielding a bigger mass, then I would recommend you swap out those Krieg squads and those combat engineers and try and squeeze in some more regular infantry. Of course, that would mean you would need to make troops your compulsory option, therefore you'd need to drop some of the heavy support choices we've taken in this list, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially from a narrative perspective. Getting more infantry in the list and having a bit less artillery definitely represents the early stages of the war when it was still one of movement. Also, if you want to be a bit more grimdark again, it could help represent the chronic shell shortage that many powers found themselves suffering from when the war really bogged down into trench networks. In addition to the infantry, I have included a single squad of Rough Riders. Now, I've taken mine as a full strength squad of 10. You may want to break that down into 2 squads of 5, purely from a gameplay and tactical perspective. I don't think any World War I list is complete without just that little seasoning of cavalry. I don't think it should be the main focus though. By the end of the war, it had become clear to all sides that the grand cavalry breakthrough was probably not going to occur. But despite this, there was still a lot of cavalry hanging around on the battlefields. World War I really was kind of the last great war to involve horseback combat, so it would be remiss not to include a little bit of it. But speaking of things you need in a Krieg-style list, we now get to the heavy support. And you'll be pleased to note that I have stuffed it to the gills with artillery. I've taken all of the infantry-based artillery that I can cram into a list. 3 heavy weapon squads with mortars and 3 field ordnance batteries with bombast cannons. The heavy weapon squads do a fantastic job of representing trench mortars, things that by the late war every unit was making use of. And of course, the FOBs represent field artillery, something that is synonymous with early industrial warfare. On the tabletop, these units aren't just narrative, but they're actually really important. They are going to be vital for softening the enemy up. We don't have a huge amount of infantry in this list. And so as a result, if we go up against enemy units that are at full strength, we're going to find our guardsmen cut to pieces pretty quickly. We need to make sure that our artillery, if not breaking the enemy, is at least cracking them open a little bit. I just want to take one moment though to address the elephant in the room. I know there will be some people down the comment section right now saying, Mordian, why haven't you taken Earthshaker platforms? They're 5 points cheaper than FOBs and statistically do a lot better than them. Let me be clear, Earthshakers would absolutely be the more viable choice, 110%. And if you have access to them, I highly recommend that you use them. There's a couple of reasons I have not included them at the forefront of the list. Firstly, I wanted to stick to using codex only units. What could I build with just the new 9th codex? But secondly, Earthshakers are expensive, they're from Forge World, and as a result, not everyone might have access to them. We also don't know if they're going to make it into 10th edition, which is just round the corner. And I feel it would be pretty bad of me to recommend that people go out and buy a crap load of Earthshakers, and then they all become unusable in a couple months' time. If you've got Earthshaker batteries available to you right now, and you really want to try this style of list out, then absolutely 110% swap out the FOBs and put in the Earthshakers. But if you don't, and you've got some field ordnance batteries, they are absolutely fine and they'll still get the job done. Putting all of this together, we end up with a list that has 134 infantry, 10 cavalry, and 15 artillery pieces. A fantastic way of representing the Great War in space and scratching that Krieg itch that every guard player has. But all of this is like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you want to go the extra mile and support the channel, please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon. By becoming a supporter, you get a whole bunch of perks, one of which is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community of almost 1,500 active people. It's always popping off in the MG Discord, and we've got hobbying, painting, army list tactics channels, and even a pretty spicy meme section too. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you Brandon F, Dagnalls, Alfarius, M1 and RCI. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to shout out the latest Patreons, so a big thank you to Simon Dolding, Anthony, Iron Nerd and Jonathan Jacobson. Last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, August Varney, and Absolute Rubbish. Thank you guys. Your ongoing support is incredibly generous, and I truly couldn't do the MG channel without you. It makes such a big difference. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.